Many of us have understood Elohim simply to mean God. However, as we examined the Hebrew scriptures more closely, we discovered that the word carries a much broader range of usage than many of us have been taught. We learned that Elohim is used in reference to Yahweh, the one true God, but it is also used in other contexts throughout Scripture. This led us to ask an important question: how should Elohim be understood in each passage? One of the most fascinating observations was that the Hebrew text itself often says Elohim, while English translations sometimes render the same word as God, gods, judges, or even angels, depending on how the translators understood the context. This reminded us of the importance of studying the scriptures carefully and allowing the biblical context to guide our understanding. We also revisited Psalms 82 and 6, where God declares, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. Rather than dismissing difficult passages, we challenged ourselves to ask why God chose these words and what he intended to communicate. Our goal is never to force Scripture to fit our assumptions, but to allow Scripture to interpret Scripture. Rather than approaching the Bible with preconceived ideas, we allow God to define his own words and establish the biblical framework through which they are to be understood. We discovered that Psalms 82 establishes an important precedent because God himself defines one of the uses of the word Elohim. In Psalms 82 and 6, God declares, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. God not only calls his children Elohim, but he also identifies their role as those who stand in his stead to execute judgment. By allowing God to define his own terminology, we establish a biblical precedent that helps us understand other passages where the word Elohim appears, including passages such as Exodus 21 and 6. We also observe that there is only one place where the Hebrew word Elohim is translated as angels. The Hebrew word for angels is malach. So the word behind angels in this passage of scripture is not malach, but Elohim. Rather than according to the Hebrew text itself, Psalms 8 and 5 says that man was made a little lower than Elohim. However, the Greek Septuagint rendered Elohim as angels, and that rendering is reflected in Hebrew's quotation of the psalm. This raises an important question. Should the Hebrew text determine our understanding, or should a later translation? When scripture speaks of being made lower, it is speaking of position and delegated authority. If Psalms 8 is translated a little lower than the angels, it naturally suggests that angels occupy a higher position of authority over mankind. Yet the broader testimony of Scripture presents a different picture. Humanity was created in the image and likeness of God, crowned with glory and honor, and given dominion over the works of his hands. By allowing Scripture to interpret Scripture, we concluded that Psalms 8 is best understood within the framework established by Genesis and Psalms 82. Humanity is not portrayed as existing beneath angels in authority, but as God's image bearers who were created just a little lower than God himself. This is not a declaration that mankind is equal to God. God alone is eternal, self-existent, and worthy of worship. Rather, it is a declaration of humanity's unique identity and delegated authority as God's children and representatives within creation. These are the kinds of discoveries that remind us why careful study matters. Every word of Scripture is significant, and when we allow God to define his own word, we often uncover truths that challenge long-held assumptions and deepen our understanding of his purpose for humanity. Some have argued that the Elohim of Psalms 82 are angels who have been given authority to judge mankind. However, this interpretation encounters a significant difficulty within the biblical text itself. Psalms 82 concludes with God's declaration, "But ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes." If the Elohim of this psalm are angels, then why would God pronounce a sentence of death upon them like men? When we allow Scripture to interpret Scripture, we find an important parallel in Luke 20:35 and 36. Jesus teaches that those who attain the resurrection cannot die anymore, for they are equal unto the angels. By implication, angels are not subject to death as mankind is. If that is true, then Psalms 82 cannot naturally be describing angels who will die like men. Instead, Psalms 82 is speaking of the children of God who have been entrusted with God's delegated authority. God calls them Elohim because they stand in his stead to execute judgment and administer justice. Yet, despite the honor and authority entrusted to them, they abuse their position through injustice and partiality. Therefore, God pronounces judgment upon them, "But ye shall die like men." Rather than dying with the honor befitting those entrusted with divine authority, they will suffer the same judgment that comes upon the children of disobedience. Their exalted calling did not exempt them from accountability. The very authority that distinguishes them also made them more responsible before God. Psalms 82 therefore serves as both a declaration of humanity's God-given authority and a solemn warning that delegated authority never places anyone above the righteous judgment of God. As we continue this study, I encourage you not to miss what the Lord is revealing through the It Is Written interactive Bible study every week builds upon the previous one. And I believe he is unfolding truths that require patience, consistency, and a willingness to search diligently.